Hi, scholars. So for today in Read Aloud, we're going to read and start reading Charlotte's Web. Before we get started, we're going to talk about character perspective. I already know, some of you already know what character perspective is, but I'm just going to go over it again. This will also be in the seesaw post that you can see on the activity. What a character thinks or believes to be true about another character, about the conflict, or about a moment in the text. You're going to put yourself in the character's shoes. When you're looking for evidence, you need to ask yourself, what did the character do? What did the character say? And how does the character feel? You're going to think about those things as we're reading Charlotte's Web. Now, I have a PDF inside. That means I just have a copy of the book inside of the seesaw activity. And you can follow along as Miss McKinney reads the book. Charlotte's Web. Before breakfast, "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It is very small and weak and will never amount to anything." "So your father has decided to do away with it." "Do away with it?" shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it? Just because it's smaller than the others?" Mrs. Arable put a pitcher of cream on the table. "Don't yell, Fern," she said. "Your father is right. The pig would probably want to die anyway." Fern pushed a chair out of the way and ran out the doors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled like springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. So scholars, already on page 1, I can see that there's a very important event that is happening. Fern's mother just told her that her father's going to kill a newborn pig. Say, "Oh, no." But while I'm reading, I want you to listen to the evidence that reveals how Fern's perspective on killing the pig and Fern's father's perspective on killing the pig. Let's turn and see. You're thinking about Fern's perspective and her father's perspective. "Please don't kill it," she sobbed. "It's unfair." Mr. Arable stopped walking by. "Fern," he said gently, "you will have to learn to control yourself." "Control myself," said Fern. "This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself." Tears ran down her cheek as she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. "Fern," said Mr. Arable, "I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along." "But it's not fair," cried Fern. "The pig couldn't help but being born small, could it?" "If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me?" Mr. Arable smiled. "Certainly not," he said, looking down at his daughter with love. But this was different. A little girl is one thing, a little runty pig is another. "I see no difference," said Fern. Sorry, scholars. Still hanging on to the axe. "This is the most terrible case of injustice I've ever heard of." A queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. "All right," he said. "You go back to the house and I will bring you the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on the bottle like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be." When Mr. Arable returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a carton under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. "Put her in the chair," said Mrs. Arable. Mr. Arable set the carton down at Fern's place. Whoa. Why does Mr. Arable let Fern keep the pig? I want you to think about it for a second. I'm going to give you some think time. So, Mr. Arable lets Fern keep the pig because she thought that it was so unfair for her father to kill the pig just because it was so small. So now, scholars, that we've done that, now it's time for us to do our big ideas and our evidence. So I'm going to put my poster up so we can see it. Make sure you still have the book open in front of you for you to see. So on a separate piece of paper, you're going to have your big ideas and you're going to have your evidence. Remember, I told you needed to be thinking about Fern's perspective and thinking about Mr. Arable or her father's perspective. So now, scholars, you're going to write along as I write. Go ahead and write these words. Fern thinks. You're going to underline the word thinks because you're putting yourself in her shoes. Fern thinks it's not fair for her father to kill the pig. I'm going to put to kill the smallest pig. Good, I'm going to give you some time to write that. You may pause the video at any time in case Ms. McKinney's moving too fast. Now I want you to think about how Fern feels. Fern feels, underline the word feels. She feels upset that her father wants to kill it. I'm going to give you some time to write that as well. Now that you have wrote in both of these things, now I want you to think about some evidence from the text. Find evidence from the text that supports your big ideas. Fern thinks it's not fair for her father to kill the smallest pig. And then Fern feels upset that her father wants to kill it. Now we need to go back and find some pieces of evidence. I see on page 1, and I'm going to copy exactly what the text says because when we go in and look at text evidence, we need to make sure that we're putting our quotation marks because it's coming right out of the book. It's what the author said. You can write as I write. Do away with it. Said Fern. This is one piece of evidence that describes how Fern is thinking. She is thinking that it's not fair for her father to kill a pig just because it's smaller than the others. Scholars, I also want you to make sure that you're keeping up with your notes for Charlotte's Web because we're going to keep continuing to read this until we're done with the book. If you cannot see it, you can definitely pause the video so you can see it a little bit better. So I found my piece of evidence for this. This is what Fern thinks. Now I need to find a piece of evidence that talks about how Fern feels upset. And I think I saw that on page 2. Control myself, yelled Fern. Fern was yelling, so that means that's telling me that she feels upset. Control myself, yelled Fern. I have my 2 big ideas and I have my 2 pieces of evidence. I'll give you a little bit of time to go ahead and copy that. Then I'm going to draw my line across my paper. I talked about Fern's perspective. Now it's time to talk about her father's perspective. Good job. You still can continue to copy as I copy, and you need to make sure you can pause the video at any time to look at what I wrote. So our next big idea is to talk about Mr. Arable's perspective. Mr. Arable thinks, don't forget to underline the word thinks, Mr. Arable thinks it's normal to kill pigs. And I want you to think about why he thinks it's normal to kill pigs. Now think about this evidence. We know that Mr. Arable thinks that it's normal to kill pigs, and here's the evidence from the text. Fern, said Mr. Arable. Make sure you go back in the book and look for that evidence. That's what Miss McKinney's going to do. Make sure I go back and make sure I'm writing the same thing that came out of the book. Fern, said Mr. Arable, I know more about raising pigs, a litter of pigs, than you do. I know about raising a litter of pigs than you do. This tells me that it's normal for Mr. Arable to go out and kill the runts of the litter because this is what he's used to, and he knows about raising pigs and what will happen if they keep the runt. But from Fern's perspective, it's completely different. And we know that Fern thinks it's not fair, and she also feels really upset. Scholars, I can't wait for us to finish Charlotte's Web on tomorrow.